The snow fell in heavy curtains, swallowing the world in white. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one a knife in her chest. Blood soaked through her torn dress, freezing against her skin as she staggered across the plain. The wind screamed, clawing at her face, and the cold was a living thing, sinking teeth into her bones. Her boots sank deep into the drifts, every step a battle against the earth itself. Somewhere behind her the wagon tracks had long vanished, erased by the storm. They'd left her own kin without a word, just the crunch of wheels and the fading outline of their backs. The horizon blurred into nothingness, and her knees buckled. She fell, hands sinking into the snow, fingers too numb to feel the ground. The world was silent now, save for the faint thud of her heart, slowing, fading. She thought of her mother's hands, calloused but warm, braiding her hair by firelight. A memory too distant to hold. Her eyes fluttered, heavy with frost. Shapes moved in the distant shadows, maybe wolves, maybe nothing. She didn't care. The cold was almost kind now, wrapping her in a strange heavy calm. Her body sank deeper into the snow, and she wondered if this was how it felt to be buried. Then, a sound sharp reel, hooves, steady and close. She tried to lift her head, but it was too heavy. A shadow loomed, dark against the white. A man's boots crunched beside her, and she felt the weight of something warm leather, smelling of tobacco and horse draped over her shoulders. His coat, hands, rough but careful, lifted her from the snow. She wanted to speak, to ask why, but her voice was gone. The world tilted and she was pressed against him, the rhythm of his horse beneath them, the creak of saddle leather loud in her ears. Warmth seeped into her, faint but stubborn, and she clung to it, even as darkness pulled her under. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the air. She woke slowly, her body aching, wrapped in blankets that smelled of cedar and smoke. The room was small, wood-planked, with a single window frosted over. A tin cup sat on a table nearby, steam curling from it. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the warmth stinging her raw fingers. She sipped broth, salty and thin, and the heat spread through her chest. Outside, the wind howled, but here, it was distant, like a story someone else was telling. She touched her side, where the blood had been. Bandages, tight and clean, covered the wound. Her dress was gone, replaced with a man's shirt, too big. The sleeves rolled to her elbows. The door creaked and he stepped in. A cowboy, lean and weathered, his face shadowed by a hat he didn't remove. His eyes were gray, like the sky before a storm, and they lingered on her just long enough to see she was awake. He set a bundle of firewood by the hearth, his movements deliberate, saying nothing. She clutched the cup tighter, her throat dry despite the broth. "Why'd you—" She started, her voice a rasp. He didn't answer, just knelt by the fire, feeding it a log. The flames caught, casting light across his hand-scarred knuckles cracked from cold. She wanted to ask more, to fill the silence, but something in his stillness stopped her. He rose, glanced at her once, then stepped back outside, the door shutting soft behind him. She leaned back against the wall. The wood cooled through the shirt. Her mind drifted unmoored. She saw her brother's face, hard and unyielding, as he'd turned the wagon away. "You're a burden now," he'd said, not looking at her. The words stung worse than the cold. She'd begged, her voice breaking, but the wheels kept rolling. Her fingers tightened around the cup, and a tear fell hot against her cheek. She wiped it away, angry at its weakness. The fire popped, and she stared into it, seeing nothing but the glow. Outside, the horse snorted, a low, living sound. She wondered where she was, who he was, and why the world hadn't let her die. The cabin was a world of shadows and small sounds. The fire's glow danced on the walls, catching the grain of the wood, worn smooth by years of wind and hands. She sat on the cot, the blanket heavy across her lap, her fingers tracing the rough weave. The broth was gone, the cup cold now, but she held it still, needing something to anchor her. Her side throbbed, a dull pulse beneath the bandages, but it was the ache in her chest that kept her awake. The memory of the wagon, her brother's back, the silence of her cousins. They'd all turned away, as if she were already a ghost. She'd been sick for weeks, coughing blood into her sleeve, slowing them down. They'd whispered when they thought she slept, their voices sharp with fear. "She won't make it," her brother had said. "We can't carry her." And so, they hadn't. She closed her eyes, and the past came unbidden. Her mother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking, the clink of spoons against tin bowls. Her father's laugh, rough but warm, as he carved a whistle from cedar for her 10th birthday. They were gone now, taken by fever to winters past. She'd clung to her brother after the only kin left, but he'd grown hard, his eyes like flint. The wagon train was his dream west to land and a new start. She'd been a weight, a chain. Her hands shook, and she set the cup down, the clink loud in the quiet. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold. He carried a bucket, snow melting off its rim, and set it by the fire. His coat was dusted white, his hat pulled low. She watched him, searching for something to read in his face, but it was closed, like a book in a language she didn't know. He poured water into a kettle, hung it over the flames, and only then did he glance her way. "You eat?" His voice was low, gravelly, like stones shifting under a river. She nodded, though her stomach still gnawed. "Thank you," she said, the words clumsy, too small for what she meant. He didn't reply, just pulled a chair to the fire and sat, his hands resting on his knees. The kettle began to hum, steam curling into the air. She wanted to ask his name, where they were, why he'd bothered with her, but the question stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "They left me. My family." His eyes flicked to her, then back to the fire. He didn't ask why, didn't offer pity, just nodded, once, as if it were a fact, like the snow or the dark. The silence stretched, not unkind but heavy. She shifted, the cot creaking. "I was sick," she said, softer now, slowed him down. "They thought I'd die anyway." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames. "Folks do what they think they gotta," he said finally. "Don't make it right." His words hung there, plain but sharp, like a blade left on a table. She felt them cut, not at him but at the truth they carried. Her brother's face flashed again, and she pushed it away, focusing on the fire, the way it ate the wood with quiet hunger. He stood, poured the hot water into a basin, and set it near her. "Wash if you want," he said, then grabbed his coat and stepped outside again. The door shut, and she was alone with the steam, the fire, the weight of his words. She dipped her hands in the water, wincing at the heat, and scrubbed at her fingers, the dirt and blood loosening, swirling dark in the basin. Her reflection wavered in the water pail, hollow-eyed, a stranger. She thought of the snow, how it had almost claimed her, and of the coat that had kept it at bay. Her chest tightened, not with pain but something else, something she didn't dare name. Outside, the wind moaned, and she heard the faint scrape of a shovel him clearing snow, keeping the world at bay. She dried her hands on the shirt, the fabric soft from wear, and lay back, the cot hard beneath her. The firelight flickered, and she wondered what kind of man carried a stranger home, asked no questions, and expected nothing in return. **** Dawn broke slow, gray light seeping through the frosted window like water through cracked earth. She sat up the cot, groaning under her weight, her breath visible in the chill. The fire had burned low, a faint glow of embers casting long shadows. Her side ached, but the pain was duller now, a reminder she was still here. She pulled the blanket tighter, the coarse wool scratching her skin, and listened. The cabin was quiet, save for the faint creak of the roof under the snow's weight. He was gone out in the cold, maybe tending the horse, maybe something else. She didn't know him, not his name, not his story, yet his presence lingered, heavy as the coat he'd wrapped her in. She stood, legs unsteady, and shuffled to the window. Her fingers brushed the glass, cold and slick, melting frost under her. Touch outside. The world was a sea of white, the horizon lost in mist. A single set of tracks lead from the cabin, deep and deliberate, toward a barn half buried in snow. She saw him then, a shadow moving through the haze, leading a horse by the reins. His hat was low, his shoulders hunched against the wind. The horse snorted, steam rising from its muzzle, and he patted its neck, a gesture so gentle it caught her off guard. She turned away, her reflection faint in the glass, gaunt, unfamiliar, her eyes too wide for her face. Her mind drifted again, back to the wagon train, the endless sway of it, the dust in her throat. She'd been strong once, hauling water, mending clothes, her laughter bright enough to draw smiles from strangers. But the fever had stolen that, left her coughing, weak, a burden. She saw her brother's hands, clenched on the reins, his jaw tight as he told her to stay behind. "We'll come back," he'd lied, not meeting her eyes. The others had said nothing, their faces turned to the west, to a future without her. She'd stood there, watching the wagon shrink, her canteen clutched like a prayer. The cold had come fast, and with it, the blood her own, seeping from a wound she didn't remember getting. Maybe a fall, maybe a fight. It blurred now, like the snow outside. The door opened, and he stepped in, snow dusting his shoulders. He carried a bundle cloth, maybe clothes, and set it on the table without a word. His eyes met hers, brief, unreadable, then flicked to the fire. "Needs tending," he said, nodding toward the hearth. She moved slow, and knelt by the fire, mimicking what she'd seen him do. The wood was heavy, her arms weak, but she placed a log carefully, watching the flames catch. He stood by the table, unwrapping the bundle, a dress, worn but clean, and a pair of boots, scuffed but sturdy. "Yours got ruined," he said, voice flat. "These'll do." She touched the dress, the fabric rough under her fingers. She started, but stopped. His face didn't change, but something in his posture, stiffer shoulders squared, told her not to ask. She nodded instead, clutching the dress to her chest. "I'm Clara," she said, the name feeling strange, like it belonged to someone else. He looked at her then, longer than before. "Eli," he said, and turned to the kettle, filling it with snow from the bucket. The silence settled again, but it was different now, less heavy, like the air after a storm. She sat by the fire, the dress in her lap, and watched him move, methodical, quiet, a man who carried his own ghosts. Her fingers traced the stitches on the dress, and she wondered who'd worn it, who'd left it behind. The fire cracked, spitting sparks, and she felt the warmth on her face, a small defiance against the cold outside. For the first time, she thought of tomorrow, and not with hope, not yet, but with a stubborn will to see it. The days blurred, each one marked by the slow rhythm of survival. Clara's strength returned in small measures first, a steadier hand, then steps without swaying. The cabin became familiar, the creak of the floorboard by the door, the way the firelight caught the knots in the walls. Eli was a constant presence, quiet but steady, his movements as deliberate as the ticking of a clock. He brought her food stew, bread, sometimes dried apples, never asking if she was hungry, just setting the plate beside her. She ate, grateful, though the silence between them grew heavier, like snow piling on a roof. She wore the dress now, its hem brushing her ankles, the fabric stiff but warm. The boots were too big, stuffed with cloth to fit, but they kept the cold at bay. She'd caught Eli watching her once, his eyes lingering on the dress, a flicker of something pain maybe, before he turned away. She didn't ask about it, though the question burned. Instead, she busied herself, sweeping the floor, mending a tear in her blanket, small tasks to prove she wasn't useless. Eli noticed but said nothing, only nodded when she stacked firewood neatly by the hearth. One morning the snow stopped. The world outside was still, the plains stretching endless under a sky like polished steel. Clara stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass, and felt the pull of the horizon. She thought of her brother, wondered if he'd reached the green valleys he'd spoken of, if he ever looked back. The thought stung, but less sharply now. She turned, catching Eli at the table, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes. The blade glinted, and she saw his hand scarred steady, the knuckles white from grip. "You ever lose someone?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His hand paused, the whetstone still. He didn't look up. "Everyone has," he said, voice low, like a door creaking shut. She waited, but he offered nothing more, just resumed sharpening, the scrape of stone filling the silence. She sat on the cot, her hands twisting in her lap. "My folks died," she said, soft of fever. "My brother, he was all I had, till he wasn't." Her voice cracked and she hated it, hated the rawness of it. Eli's hand stopped again, and he set the knife down, his eyes on the table, seeing something she couldn't. "Lost my wife," he said finally, the words heavy like stones dropped in water. 2 winters back sickness took her. He didn't move, didn't look at her, but the air shifted, charged with something unspoken. Clara's chest tightened, and she glanced at the dress, understanding now why it fit like a memory. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words useless but all she had. He nodded once and picked up the knife again, the scrape resuming, slower now. That night she couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, and the cabin was cold, the kind that settled in your bones. She thought of Eli's wife, imagined her laughter, her hands folding this dress, her breath fogging the same window. Clara wondered if Eli saw her in every corner, if saving a stranger was his way of fighting the ghosts. She pulled the blanket tighter, her mind drifting to the wagon, the snow, the moment she'd given up. But she was here now, alive, because of a man who owed her nothing. The thought was a weight, not of guilt but of something new, gratitude maybe, or the first stirrings of trust. Morning came, and Eli was gone longer than usual. Clara swept the floor, her movements stronger, more sure. When he returned, his face was flushed from cold, his arms full of wood. "Storm's coming," he said, stacking the logs. "Bad one." She nodded, helping him carry the wood, their hands brushing once, brief but enough to make her pause. He didn't seem to notice, just kept working, but she felt it, a spark, in the quiet. The sky outside darkened, the wind picking up, and Clara felt the cabin shrink, the world narrowing to this small, warm space. She wasn't ready to trust, not fully, but for the first time. She didn't feel alone. The storm came at dusk, a howl that shook the cabin's walls and sent snow swirling against the window. Clara sat by the fire, her hands clasped tight, the dresses hem-damped from helping Eli board the shutters. The wind screamed like something alive, and the flames flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Eli stood by the door, checking the latch, his face carved in lines of focus. He'd brought the horse into the barn, secured the woodpile, and now there was nothing left but to wait. Clara felt the weight of the storm, not just outside but within her past, her betrayal, the fragile thread of safety here. She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. Eli sat across from her, his chair creaking, and pulled a tin from his pocket. He offered her a piece of dried apple, the gesture small but deliberate. She took it, the sweetness sharp on her tongue, and nodded thanks. "How long's it last?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind's roar. "Day, maybe 2, he said, chewing slowly. His eyes stayed on the fire, but she sensed he was listening not just to her, but to the storm, the cabin, the world holding its breath. She shifted, the cot creaking, and thought of her brother, how he'd cursed storms, how he'd left her in one. The memory stung, but it was fainter now, like a bruise fading. She looked at Eli, his hands resting on his knees, scarred and still, and wondered what he saw in the flames. His wife, maybe, or the man he'd been before the world took her. "You always live here?" she asked, softer, testing the silence. He glanced at her, his eyes gray and guarded, then back to the fire. "Long enough," he said. "Built it with her meant to stay." The words were plain, but they carried a weight, like stones he'd carried too long. Clara's fingers tightened on the apple, its texture rough against her skin. She wanted to ask more her name, what she was like, but the storm's howl filled the space, and she let it lie. Instead, she said, "I was headed west, thought it'd be better new." Eli's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "West's just more land," he said. "Don't fix what's broke inside." His words landed heavy, not cruel but true, and Clara felt them settle in her chest. She thought of her brother's dreams, the promises of green valleys, how they'd turned to dust in her hands. She looked at the fire, the way it fought the cold, and felt something shift, a question, not an answer. What was she now, without them? What did she want? The storm raged on, and they sat in its roar. The silence between them softer now, like snow falling fresh. Clara's side ached, but she felt stronger, her body knitting itself whole. She thought of leaving, of walking into the world again, and the thought scared her, not the cold, but the emptiness. Yet here, in this cabin, with a man who spoke little but did much, she felt a tether, thin but real. She wasn't ready to trust it, not fully, but she didn't want to cut it either. Eli stood, adding a log to the fire, the flames flaring bright. "Get some rest," he said, not looking at her. She nodded, lying back on the cot, the blanket heavy and warm. The storm's howl faded to a low moan, and she closed her eyes, her mind drifting. She saw the snow, the wagon tracks vanishing, but this time, she saw Eli's coat, his hands lifting her, the fire's glow. The images blurred, soft and warm, and she slept, deeper than she had in weeks. Morning came, the storm weaker but still. Fierce Eli was at the table, mending a harness, his fingers deft despite their scars. Clara sat up, her hair tangled, and met his eyes. "I can help," she said, not sure what she meant today, tomorrow, or something more. He paused, then nodded, sliding a needle and thread across the table. She took it, her hand steady, and began to stitch. The small act, a choice, a step toward something she couldn't yet name. The storm broke on the third day, leaving a silence so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. Clara stood at the window, the glass cold against her palm, watching the snow settle under a sky bruised with dawn. The plain stretched, endless, untouched, the barn a dark smudge against the white. Eli was out there, his tracks cutting a path to the horse, his breath steaming in the air. She watched him move, slow and sure, and felt a pull not to follow, but to stay, to root herself in this small, hard-won warmth. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, the pot simmering on the fire. Clara had mended the harness yesterday, her stitches uneven but strong, and Eli had nodded, a quiet approval that warmed her more than the flames. She'd started small tasks without asking, boiling water, stacking wood, each one a claim to her place here. Her side still ached, but she moved easier now, her body remembering its strength. The dress fit better too, as if her frame was filling it, becoming its own. Eli came in, snow clinging to his boots, and set a rifle by the door. "Wolves," he said, catching her glance. "Heard 'em last night." She nodded, the memory of shadows and the snow flickering through her mind. He poured coffee, handed her a tin mug, and sat across from her. The steam curled between them, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to fill the silence. It was enough to sit, to share the warmth, to let the world outside be what it was. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her voice steady. "I don't know where to go." She looked at her hands, the calluses forming anew, and felt the weight of the words. "West don't seem to matter no more." Eli sipped his coffee, his eyes on her, listening. She swallowed, the mug hot against her palms. "I could stay. Help if you'd have me." He set his mug down, the clink loud in the quiet. His face was unreadable, but his hands flexed, knuckles whitening. "Ain't much here," he said, voice low, hard, life cold, lonely. He looked at the fire, and she saw it again, that flicker of pain, the ghost of his wife in the dress she wore. "You'd be choosing that." Clara's chest tightened, not with fear but with clarity. She thought of the wagon, the betrayal, the snow that had nearly claimed her. She thought of her brother's face, fading now, and the dreams she'd carried. West, crumbling like ash. "I chose worse before," she said, soft but firm. "This feels like living." Eli's eyes met hers, gray and searching, and for a moment, she saw him, not the cowboy, not the rescuer, but the man, raw and worn, carrying his own scars. He nodded once and stood, grabbing his coat. "Need to check the traps?" he said, but his voice was softer, like the snow outside. She watched him go, the door shutting quiet, and felt something settle, a decision. Not loud but deep, like roots taking hold. She spent the day working, sweeping, boiling broth, mending a shirt she'd found torn. Each task was small, but together, they built something, a rhythm, a life. When Eli returned, his hands red from cold, he carried a rabbit, skinned and ready for the pot. They cooked together, not speaking much, But the silence was warm now. The fire crackled, and the cabin glowed a small defiance against the dark. That night, Clara lay on the cot, the blanket soft against her skin. She thought of the snow, how it had buried her, and of Eli's coat, how it had pulled her back. The wind was quiet now, the plain still, and she felt it at peace, fragile but real, like the first light after a long night. She closed her eyes, the fire's glow, lingering, and knew she was home.